Good evening. Well, here we are. For tonight's short story, I want to turn once again to that master storyteller, Somerset Maugham. Now, a reminder, William Somerset Maugham was born January 25th, 1874, died on December 16th, 1965. He was among the most popular writers of his era and reputedly the highest paid author during the 1930s. Both of his parents died before he was 10, and he was raised by a paternal uncle who was emotionally cold. Now, the early death of his mother when he was 8 left him traumatized, and for the rest, he kept her picture by his bed for the rest of his life. I think probably that the trauma, though it certainly affected his private life, somehow had an effect on him as a writer, well, as our lives do, and his short stories are just amazing. They run an incredibly wide gamut, and his novels as well. But this is a short story I did not know until very recently. It's called Winter Cruise. I found it delightful, and I hope you will too. Winter Cruise. Captain Erdmann knew Miss Reed very little till the Friedrich Weber reached Haiti. She came on board at Plymouth, but by then he had taken on a number of passengers, French, Belgian, and Haitian, many of whom had traveled with him before, and she was placed at the chief engineer's table. The Friedrich Weber was a freighter sailing regularly from Hamburg to Cartagena on the Colombian coast, and on the way touching at a number of islands in the West Indies. She carried phosphates and cement from Germany and took back coffee and timber. But her owners, the brothers Weber, were always willing to send her out of her route if a cargo of any sort made it worth their while. The Friedrich Weber was prepared to take cattle, mules, potatoes, or anything else that offered the chance of earning an honest penny. She carried passengers. There were 6 cabins on the upper deck and 6 below. The accommodation was not luxurious, but the food was good, plain, and abundant, and the fares were cheap. The round trip took 9 weeks and was not costing Miss Reed more than £45. She looked forward not only to seeing many interesting places with historical associations, but also to acquiring a great deal of information that would enrich her mind. The agent warned her that till the ship reached Port-au-Prince in Haiti, she would have to share a cabin with another woman. Miss Reed did not mind that. She liked company, and when the steward told her that her companion was Madame Boulin, she thought at once it would be a very good opportunity to rub up her French. She was only very slightly disconcerted when she found that Madame Boulin was coal-black. She told herself that one had to accept the rough with the smooth, and that it takes all sorts to make a world. Miss Reed was a good sailor, as indeed was only to be expected since her grandfather had been a naval officer. But after a couple of roughish days, the weather was fine, and in a very short while she knew all of her fellow passengers. She was a good mixer. That was one of the reasons why she had made a success of her business. She owned a tea room at a celebrated beauty spot in the west of England, and she always had a smile and a pleasant word for every customer who came in. She closed down in the winter, and for the last 4 years had taken a cruise. You met such interesting people, she said, and you always learnt something. It was true that the passengers on the Friedrich Weber weren't of quite so good a class as those she had met the year before on a Mediterranean cruise. But Miss Reed was not a snob, and though the table manners of some of them shocked her somewhat, determined to look upon the bright side of things, she decided to make the best of them. She was a great reader, and was glad, on looking at the ship's library, to find that there were a lot of books by Phillips Oppenheim, Edgar Wallace, and Agatha Christie. But with so many people to talk to, she had no time for reading, and she made up her mind to leave them till the ship emptied itself at Haiti. After all, she said, human nature is more important than literature. Miss Reed had always had the reputation of being a good talker, and she flattered herself that not once during the many days they were at sea had she allowed the conversation at table to languish. She knew how to draw people out, and whenever a topic seemed to be exhausted, she had a remark ready to revive it, or another topic waiting on the tip of her tongue to set the conversation off again. Her friend, Miss Prince, daughter of the late Vicar of Campden, who had come to see her off at Plymouth, for she lived there, had often said to her, "You know, Venetia, you have a mind like a man. You're never at a loss for something to say." Well, I think if you're interested in everyone will be interested in you, Miss Reed answered modestly. Practice makes perfect, and I have the infinite capacity for taking pains, which Dickens said was genius. Miss Reed was not really called Venetia. Her name was Alice. But disliking it, she had, when still a girl, adopted the poetic name which she felt so much better suited to her personality. Miss Reed had a great many interesting talks with her fellow passengers, and she was really sorry when the ship at length reached Port-au-Prince, and the last of them disembarked. The Friedrich Weber stopped 2 days there, during which she visited the town and the neighborhood. When they sailed, she was the only passenger. The ship was skirting the coast of the island, stopping off at a variety of ports to discharge or to take on cargo. "I hope you will not feel embarrassed alone with so many men, Miss Reed," said the captain heartily, as they sat down to midday dinner. She was placed on his right hand, and at table, besides, sat the first mate, the chief engineer, and the doctor. "I'm a woman of the world, Captain. I always think if a lady is a lady, gentlemen will be gentlemen. We're only rough sailormen, madam. You mustn't expect too much. Kind hearts are more than coronets, and simple faith than Norman blood, Captain," answered Miss Reed. He was a short, thick-set man with a clean-shaven head and a red, clean-shaven face. He wore a white Stengershifter, but, except at mealtimes, unbuttoned at the neck and showing his hairy chest. He was a jovial fellow. He could not speak without bellowing. Miss Reed thought him quite an eccentric, but she had a keen sense of humor and was prepared to make allowances for that. She took the conversation in hand. She had learnt a great deal about Haiti on the voyage out, and more during the 2 days she had spent there, but she knew that men liked to talk rather than to listen, so she put them a number of questions to which she already knew the answers. Oddly enough, they didn't. In the end, she found herself obliged to give quite a little lecture, and before dinner was over, Mittenessen, they called it in their funny way, she had imparted to them a great deal of interesting information about the history and the economic situation of the Republic, the problems that confronted it, and its prospects for the future. She talked rather slowly, in a refined voice, and her vocabulary was extensive. At nightfall, they put in at a small port, where they were to load 300 bags of coffee, and the agent came on board. The captain asked him to stay to supper and ordered cocktails. As the steward brought them, Miss Reed swam into the saloon. Her movements were deliberate, elegant, and self-assured. She always said that you could tell at once by the way she walked if a woman was a lady. The captain introduced the agent to her, and she sat down. "What is that you men are drinking?" she asked. "A cocktail. Will you have one, Miss Reed?" "I don't mind if I do." She drank it, and the captain somewhat doubtfully asked her if she would have another. "Another? Well, just to be matey." The agent, much whiter than some, but a good deal darker than many, was the son of a former minister of Haiti to the German court, and having lived for many years in Berlin, spoke good German. It was indeed on this account that he had got a job with a German shipping firm. On the strength of this, Miss Reed, during supper, told them all about a trip down the Rhine that she had once taken. Afterwards, she and the agent, the skipper, the doctor, and the mate sat round a table and drank beer. Miss Reed made it her business to draw the agent out. The fact that they were loading coffee suggested to her that he would be interested in learning how they grew tea in Ceylon. Yes, she had been to Ceylon on a cruise. And the fact that his father was a diplomat made it certain that he would be interested in the royal family of England. She had a very pleasant evening. When she at last retired to rest, for she never would have thought of saying that she was going to bed, she said to herself, "There's no doubt that travel is a great education." It was really an experience to find herself alone with all these men. How they would laugh when she told them all about it when she got home. They would say that things like that only happened to Venetia. She smiled when she heard the captain on deck singing with that great booming voice of his. Germans were so musical. He had a funny way of strutting up and down on his short legs, singing Wagner tunes to words of his own invention. It was Tannhäuser he was singing now, that lovely thing about the evening star. But knowing no German, Miss Reed could only wonder what absurd words he was putting to it. It was as well. "Oh, what a bore that woman is! I shall certainly kill her if she goes on much longer." Then he broke into Siegfried's martial strain. "She's a bore, she's a bore, she's a bore! I shall throw her into the sea." And that, of course, is what Miss Reed was. She was a crashing, she was a stupendous, she was an excruciating bore. She talked in a steady monotone, and it was no use to interrupt her, because then she started again from the beginning. She had an insatiable thirst for information, and no casual remark could be thrown across the table without her asking innumerable questions about it. She was a great dreamer, and she narrated her dreams at intolerable length. There was no subject upon which she had not something prosy to say. She had a truism for every occasion. She hit on the commonplace like a hammer driving a nail into the wall. She plunged into the obvious like a clown in the circus jumping through a hoop. Silence did not abash her. Those poor men, far away from their homes and the patter of little feet, and with Christmas coming on, no wonder they felt low. She redoubled her efforts to interest and amuse them. She was determined to bring a little gaiety into their dull lives, for that was the awful part of it. Miss Reed meant well. She was not only having a good time herself, but she was trying to give all of them a good time. She was convinced that they liked her as much as she liked them. She felt that she was doing her bit to make the party a success, and she was naively happy to think that she was succeeding. She told them all about her friend, Miss Price, and how often she had said to her, "Venetia, no one ever has a dull moment in your company." It was the captain's duty to be polite to a passenger, and however much he would have liked to tell her to hold her silly tongue, he could not. But even if he had been free to say what he liked, he knew that he could not have brought himself to hurt her feelings. Nothing stemmed the torrent of her loquacity. It was as irresistible as a force of nature. Once, in desperation, they started talking in German, but Miss Reed stopped this at once. "Now, I won't have you saying things I don't understand. You ought all to make the most of your good luck in having me all to yourselves and practice your English." "We were talking of technical matters that would only bore you, Miss Reed," said the captain. "I'm never bored. That's why, if you won't think me a wee bit conceited to say so, I'm never boring. You see, I like to know things. Everything interests me, and you never know when a bit of information won't come in useful." The doctor smiled dryly. The captain was only saying that because he was embarrassed. In point of fact, he was telling a story that was not fit for the ears of a maiden lady. "I may be a maiden lady, but I'm also a woman of the world. I don't expect sailors to be saints. You need never be afraid of what you say before me, Captain. I shan't be shocked. I should love to hear your story." The doctor was a man of 60 with thin grey hair, a grey moustache, and small, bright blue eyes. He was a silent, bitter man, and however hard Miss Reed tried to bring him into the conversation, it was almost impossible to get a word out of him. But she wasn't a woman who would give in without a struggle, and one morning when they were at sea and she saw him sitting on deck with a book, she brought her chair next to his and sat down beside him. "Are you fond of reading, Doctor?" she said brightly. "Yes." "So am I. And I suppose, like all Germans, you're musical." "I'm fond of music." "So am I. The moment I saw you, I thought you looked clever." He gave her a brief look and, pursing his lips, went on reading. Miss Reed was not disconcerted. "But of course one can always read. I always prefer a good talk to a good book. Don't you?" "No." "How very interesting. Now do tell me why." "I can't give you a reason." "That's very strange, isn't it? But then I always think human nature is strange. I'm terribly interested in people, you know. I always like doctors. They know so much about human nature. But I could tell you some things that would surprise even you. You learn a great deal about people if you run a tea shop like I do. That's to say, if you keep your eyes open." The doctor got up. "I must ask you to excuse me, Miss Reed. I have to go and see a patient." "Anyhow, I've broken the ice now," she thought as he walked away. "I think he was only shy." But a day or two later, the doctor was not feeling at all well. He had an internal malady that troubled him now and then, but he was used to it and disinclined to talk about it. When he had one of his attacks, he only wanted to be left alone. His cabin was small and stuffy, so he settled himself on a long chair on deck and lay with his eyes closed. Miss Reed was walking up and down to get the half-hour's exercise she took morning and evening. He thought that if he pretended to be asleep, she would not disturb him. But when she had passed him half a dozen times, she stopped in front of him and stood quite still. Though he kept his eyes closed, he knew that she was looking at him. "Is there anything I can do, Doctor?" she said. He started. "Why, what should there be?" "You look dreadfully ill," she said. "I'm in great pain." "I know. I can see that. Can't something be done?" "No. It'll pass off presently." She hesitated for a moment, then went away. Presently she returned. You look so uncomfortable with no cushions or anything. I've brought you my own pillow that I always travel with. Do let me put it behind your head." He felt at that moment too ill to remonstrate. She lifted his head gently and put the soft pillow behind it. It really did make him feel more comfortable. She passed her hand across his forehead, and it was cool and soft. "Poor dear," she said. "I know what doctors are. They haven't the first idea how to take care of themselves." She left him, but in a minute or two returned with a chair and a bag. The doctor, when he saw her, gave a twitch of anguish. "Now, I'm not going to let you talk. I'm just going to sit beside you and knit. I always think it's a comfort when one isn't feeling very well to have someone near." She sat down and, taking an unfinished muffler out of her bag, began busily to ply her needles. She never said a word, and strangely enough, the doctor found her company a solace. No one else on board had even noticed that he was ill. He had felt lonely, and the sympathy of that crashing bore was grateful to him. It soothed him to see her silently working, and presently, presently he fell asleep. When he awoke, she was still working. She gave him a little smile, but did not speak. His pain had left him, and he felt much better. He did not go into the saloon until late in the afternoon. He found the captain and Hans Kraus, the mate, having a glass of beer together. "Sit down, doctor," said the captain. "We're holding a council of war. You know that the day after tomorrow is Silvester Abend, of course." Silvester Abend, New Year's Eve, is an occasion that means a great deal to a German, and they had all been looking forward to it. They had brought a Christmas tree all the way from Germany with them. At dinner today, Miss Reed was more talkative than ever. "Hans and I have decided that something must be done about it." She sat with me for 2 hours this morning in silence. I suppose she was making up for lost time. It's bad enough to be away from one's home and family just now anyway, and all we can do is to make the best of a bad job. We want to enjoy our Silvester Abend, and unless something is done about Miss Reed, we haven't a chance. "We can't have a good time if she's with us," said the mate. "She'll spoil it as sure as eggs is eggs." "How do you propose to get rid of her?" "Short of throwing her overboard," smiled the doctor. "She's not a bad old soul. All she wants is a lover." "At her age?" cried Hans Kraus. "Especially at her age. That inordinate loquacity, that passion for information, the innumerable questions she asks, her prosiness, the way she goes on and on, it is all a sign of her clamoring virginity. A lover would bring her peace. Those jangled nerves of hers would relax. At least for an hour she would have lived. The deep satisfaction which her being demands would travel through those exacerbated centers of speech, and we should have quiet." It was always a little difficult to know how much the doctor meant what he said, and when he was having a joke at your expense. The captain's blue eyes, however, twinkled mischievously. "Well, doctor, I have great confidence in your powers of diagnosis. The remedy you suggest is evidently worth trying, and since you are a bachelor, it is clear that it is up to you to apply it." "Pardon me, Captain. It is my professional duty to prescribe remedies for the patients under my charge in this ship, but not to administer them personally. Besides, I am 60. "I am a married man with grown-up children," said the captain. "I am old and fat and asthmatic. It is obvious that I cannot be expected to undertake a task of this kind. Nature cut me out for the role of a husband and father, not for that of a lover." Youth in these matters is essential, and good looks are advantageous, said the doctor gravely. The captain gave a great bang on the table with his fist. You are thinking of Hans. You are quite right. Hans must do it. The mate sprang to his feet. Me? Never. Hans, you are tall, handsome, strong as a lion, brave and young. We have 23 days more at sea before we reach Hamburg. You wouldn't desert your trusted old captain in an emergency, or let down your good friend, the doctor? No, Captain, it's asking too much of me. I have been married less than a year, and I love my wife. I can hardly wait to get back to Hamburg. She is yearning for me as I am yearning for her. I will not be unfaithful to her, especially with Miss Reed. Miss Reed's not so bad, said the doctor. Some people might even call her even nice-looking, said the captain. And indeed, when you took Miss Reed feature by feature, she was not, in fact, a plain woman. True, she had a long, stupid face, but her brown eyes were large, and she had very thick lashes. Her brown hair was cut short and curled rather prettily over her neck. She hadn't a bad skin, and she was neither too fat nor too thin. She was not old, as people go nowadays, and if she had told you she was 40, you would have been quite willing to believe it. The only thing against her was that she was drab and dull. Must I then, for 23 mortal days, endure the prolixity of that tedious woman? Must I for 23 mortal days answer her inane questions and listen to her fatuous remarks? Must I, an old man, have my Sylvester Orbit, the jolly evening I was looking forward to, ruined by the unwelcome company of that intolerable virgin? And all because no one can be found to show a little gallantry, a little human kindness, a spark of charity to a lonely woman. I shall wreck this ship. There's always the radio operator, said Hans. The captain gave a loud shout. Hans, let the 10,000 virgins of Cologne arise and call you blessed. Steward, he bellowed, tell the radio operator that I want him. The radio operator came into the saloon and smartly clicked his heels together. The three men looked at him in silence. He wondered uneasily whether he had done something for which he was to be hauled over the coals. He was above the middle height, with square shoulders and narrow hips, erect and slender. His tan, smooth skin looked as though a razor had never touched it. He had large eyes of a startling blue and a mane of curling golden hair. He was a perfect specimen of young Teutonic manhood. He was so healthy, so vigorous, so much alive, that even when he stood some way from you, you felt the glow of his vitality. Aryan, all right, said the captain. No doubt about that. How old are you, my boy? 21, sir. Married? No, sir. Engaged? The radio operator chuckled. There was an engaging boyishness in his laugh. No, sir. You know that we have a female passenger on board? Yes, sir. Do you know her? I've said good morning to her when I've seen her on deck. The captain assumed his most official manner. His eyes, which generally twinkled with fun, were stern, and he got a sort of bark into his rich, fruity voice. Although this is a cargo boat, and we carry valuable freight, we also take such passengers as we can get, and this is a branch of our business that the company is anxious to encourage. My instructions are to do everything possible to promote the happiness and comfort of the passengers. Miss Reed needs a lover. the doctor and I have come to the conclusion that you are well suited to satisfy Miss Reed's requirements." "Me, sir?" The radio operator blushed scarlet and then began to giggle, but quickly composed himself when he saw the set faces of the three men who confronted him. "But she's old enough to be my mother." "That, at your age, is a matter of no consequence. She is a woman of the highest distinction and allied to all the great families of England. If she were German, she would be at least a countess. That you should have been chosen for this responsible position is an honor which you should greatly appreciate. Furthermore, your English is halting, and this will give you an excellent opportunity to improve it." "That, of course, is something to be thought of," said the radio operator. "I know that I want practice." "It is not often in this life that it is possible to combine pleasure with intellectual improvement, and you must congratulate yourself on your good fortune." "But if I may be allowed to put the question, sir, why does Miss Reed want a lover?" "It appears to be an old English custom for unmarried women of exalted rank to submit themselves to the embraces of a lover at this time of the year. The company is anxious that Miss Reed should be treated exactly as she would be on an English ship, and we trust that if she is satisfied with her aristocratic connections, she will be able to persuade many of her friends to take cruises on the ship's lines." "Sir, I must ask to be excused." "It is not a request that I am making. It is an order. You will present yourself to Miss Reed in her cabin at 11 o'clock tonight." "What shall I do when I get there?" "Do?" thundered the captain. "Do? Act naturally." With a wave of his hand, he dismissed him. The radio operator clicked his heels, saluted, and went out. "Now, let us have another glass of beer," said the captain. At supper that evening, Miss Reed was at her best. She was verbose, she was playful, she was refined. There was not a truism that she failed to utter. There was not a commonplace that she forbore to express. She bombarded them with foolish questions. The captain's face grew redder and redder as he sought to contain his fury. He felt that he could not go on being polite to her any longer, and if the doctor's remedy did not help, one day he would forget himself and give her not a piece, but the whole of his mind. "I shall lose my job," he thought, "but I'm not sure that it wouldn't be worth it." Next day they were already sitting at table when she came in to dinner. "Sylvester Aubin tomorrow," she said brightly. That was the sort of thing she would say. She went on, "Well, what have you all been up to this morning?" Since they did exactly the same thing every day, and she knew very well what that was, the question was enraging. The captain's heart sank. He briefly told the doctor what he thought of him. "Now, no German, please," said Miss Reed archly. "You know I don't allow that. And why, Captain, did you give the poor doctor that sour look? It's Christmas time, you know. Peace and goodwill to all men. I'm so excited about tomorrow evening. And will there be candles on the Christmas tree?" "Naturally." "How thrilling. I always think a Christmas tree without candles isn't a Christmas tree." "Oh, do you know, I had such a funny experience last night. I can't understand it at all." A startled pause. They all looked intently at Miss Reed. For once they hung on her lips. "Yes," she went on, in that monotonous, rather finicky way of hers, "I was just getting into bed last night when there was a knock at my door. 'Who is it?' I said. 'It's the radio operator,' was the answer. 'What is it?' I said. "Can I speak to you?" he said. They listened with rapt attention. "Well, I'll just pop on a dressing gown," I said, and opened the door. So I popped on a dressing gown and opened the door. The radio operator said, "Excuse me, miss, but do you want to send a radio?" Well, I did think it was funny, his coming at that hour to ask me if I wanted to send a radio. I just laughed in his face. It appealed to my sense of humor, if you understand what I mean. But I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I said, "Thank you so much, but I don't think I want to send a radio." He stood there looking so funny, as if he was quite embarrassed. So I said, "Thank you all the same for asking me." And then I said, "Good night, pleasant dreams," and shut the door. "The damned fool!" cried the captain. "He's young, Miss Reed," the doctor put in. "It was excess of zeal. I suppose he thought you would want to send a New Year's greetings to your friends, and he wished you to get the advantage of the special rate." "Oh, I didn't mind at all. I like those queer little things that happen to one when one's traveling. I just get a good laugh out of them. As soon as dinner was over and Miss Reed had left them, the captain sent for the radio operator. "You idiot! What in heaven's name made you ask Miss Reed last night whether she wanted to send a radio?" "Sir, you told me to act naturally. I am a radio operator. I thought it natural to ask her if she wanted to send a radio. I didn't know what else to say." "God in heaven!" shouted the captain. "When Siegfried saw Brunhilde lying on a rock and cried, 'Das ist kein Mann,'" the captain signed the words, and being pleased with the sound of his voice, repeated the phrase 2 or 3 times before he continued, "Did Siegfried, when she awoke, ask her if she wished to send a radio? To announce to her papa, I suppose, that she was sitting up after her long sleep and taking notice?" I beg most respectfully to draw your attention to the fact that Brunhilde was Siegfried's aunt. Miss Reed is a total stranger to me. He did not reflect that she was his aunt. He knew only that she was a beautiful and defenseless woman of obviously good family, and he acted as any gentleman would have done. You are young, handsome, Aryan to the tips of your fingers. The honor of Germany is in your hands." "Very good, sir. I will do my best." That night, there was another knock on Miss Reed's door. "Who is it?" "The radio operator. I have a radio for you, Miss Reed." "For me?" She was surprised, but it at once occurred to her that one of her fellow passengers, who had got off at Haiti, had sent her New Year's greetings. How very kind people are, she thought. "I'm in bed. Leave it outside the door." "It needs an answer. 10 words, prepaid." Then it couldn't be a New Year's greeting. Her heart skipped a beating. It could only mean one thing. Her shop had been burned to the ground. She jumped out of bed. "Slip it under the door, and I'll write the answer and slip it back to you." The envelope was pushed under the door, and as it appeared on the carpet, it had really a sinister look. Miss Reed snatched it up and tore the envelope open. The words swam before her eyes, and she couldn't for a moment find her spectacles. This is what she read. "Happy New Year. Stop. Peace and goodwill to all men. Stop. You are very beautiful. Stop. I love you. Stop. I must speak to you. Stop. Signed, radio operator." Miss Reed read this through twice. Then she slowly took off her spectacles and hid them under a scarf. She opened the door. "Come in," she said. Next day was New Year's Eve. The officers were cheerful and a little sentimental when they sat down to dinner. The stewards had decorated the saloon with tropical creepers to make up for holly and mistletoe, and the Christmas tree stood on a table with the candles ready to be lit at supper time. Miss Reed did not come in till the officers were seated, and when they bade her good morning, she did not speak, but merely bowed. They looked at her curiously. She ate a good dinner, but uttered never a word. Her silence was uncanny. At last the captain could stand it no longer, and he said, "You're very quiet today, Miss Reed." "I'm thinking," she remarked. "And will you not tell us your thoughts, Miss Reed?" the doctor asked playfully. "I prefer to keep them to myself, doctor." "I will have a little more of that hash. I've got a very good appetite." They finished the meal in a blessed silence. The captain heaved a sigh of relief. That was what mealtime was for, to eat, not to chatter. When they had finished, he went up to the doctor and wrung his hand. "Something has happened, doctor." "It has happened. She's a changed woman. But will it last?" "One can only hope for the best." Miss Reed put on an evening dress for the evening's celebration, a very quiet black dress with artificial roses at her bosom and a long string of imitation jade round her neck. The lights were dimmed and the candles on the Christmas tree were lit. It felt a little like being in church. The junior officers were supping in the saloon that evening, and they looked very smart in their white uniforms. Champagne was served at the company's expense, and after supper they had a Maibele. They pulled crackers. They sang songs to the gramophone. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, Alt Heidelberg, and Auld Lang Syne. They shouted out the tunes lustily, the captain's voice rising loud above the others, and Miss Reed joining in with a pleasing contralto. The doctor noticed that Miss Reed's eyes from time to time rested on the radio operator, and in them he read an expression of some bewilderment. "He's a good-looking fellow, isn't he?" said the doctor. Miss Reed turned round and looked at the doctor coolly. "Who?" "The radio operator. I thought you were looking at him." "Which is he?" "The duplicity of women," the doctor muttered. But with a smile he answered, "He's sitting next to the chief engineer." "Oh, of course. I recognize him now. You know, I never think it matters what a man looks like. I'm so much more interested in a man's brains than in his looks." "Ah," said the doctor. They all got a little tight, including Miss Reed, but she did not lose her dignity, and when she bade them good night, it was in her best manner. "I've had a very delightful evening. I shall never forget my New Year's Eve on a German boat. It's been very interesting, quite an experience." She walked steadily to the door, and this was something of a triumph, for she had drunk drink for drink with the rest of them through the evening. They were all somewhat jaded the next day. When the captain, the mate, the doctor, and the chief engineer came down to dinner, they found Miss Reed already seated. Before each place was a small parcel tied up in pink ribbon. On each was written, "Happy New Year." They gave Miss Reed a questioning glance. "You've all been so very kind to me. I thought I'd like to give each of you a little present. There wasn't much choice at Port-au-Prince, so you mustn't expect too much." There was a pair of briar pipes for the captain, half a dozen silk handkerchiefs for the doctor, a cigar case for the mate, and a couple of ties for the chief engineer. They had dinner, and Miss Reed retired to her cabin to rest. The officers looked at one another uncomfortably. The mate fiddled with the cigar case she had given him. I'm a little ashamed of myself, he said at last. The captain was pensive, and it was plain that he too was a trifle uneasy. I wonder if we ought to have played that trick on Miss Reed, he said. She's a good old soul, and she's not rich. She's a woman who earns her own living. She must have spent the best part of 100 marks on these presents. I almost wish we'd left her alone. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. You wanted her silenced, and I silenced her. When all's said and done, it wouldn't have hurt us to listen to her chatter for 3 weeks more, said the mate. I'm not happy about her, added the captain. I feel there's something ominous in her quietness. She had spoken hardly a word during the meal they had just shared with her. She seemed hardly to listen to what they said. Don't you think you ought to ask her if she's feeling quite well, Doctor? Suggested the captain. Of course she's feeling quite well. She's eating like a wolf. If you want inquiries made, you'd much better make them of the radio operator. You may not be aware of it, Doctor, but I am a man of great delicacy. I am a man of heart myself, said the doctor. For the rest of the journey, those men spoilt Miss Reed outrageously. They treated her with the consideration they would have shown to someone who was convalescent after a long and dangerous illness. Though her appetite was excellent, they sought to tempt her with new dishes. The doctor ordered wine and insisted on her sharing his bottle with him. They played dominoes with her. They played chess with her. They played bridge with her. They engaged her in conversation. But there was no doubt about it. Though she responded to their advances with politeness, she kept herself to herself. She seemed to regard them with something very like disdain. You might almost have thought that she looked upon those men and their efforts to be amiable as pleasantly ridiculous. She seldom spoke unless spoken to. She read detective stories and at night sat on deck looking at the stars. She lived a life of her own. At last the journey drew to its close. They sailed up the English Channel on a still, grey day. They sighted land. Miss Reed packed her trunk. At 2:00 in the afternoon, they docked at Plymouth. The captain, the mate, and the doctor came along to say goodbye to her. Well, Miss Reed, said the captain in his jovial way, we're sorry to lose you, but I suppose you're glad to be getting home. You've been very kind to me. You've all been very kind to me. I don't know what I've done to deserve it. I've been very happy with you. I shall never forget you. She spoke rather shakily. She tried to smile, but her lips quivered and tears ran down her cheeks. The captain got very red. He smiled awkwardly. May I kiss you, Miss Reed? She was taller than he by half a head. She bent down and he planted a fat kiss on one wet cheek and a fat kiss on the other. She turned to the mate and the doctor. They both kissed her. What an old fool I am, she said. Everybody's so good. She dried her eyes and slowly, in her graceful, rather absurd way, walked down the companion. The captain's eyes were wet. When she reached the quay, she looked up and waved to someone on the boat deck. Who's she waving to? Asked the captain. The radio operator. Miss Price was waiting on the quay to welcome her. When they had passed the customs and got rid of Miss Reed's heavy luggage, they went to Miss Price's house and had an early cup of tea. Miss Reed's train did not start till 5. Miss Price had much to tell Miss Reed. But it's too bad of me to go on like this when you've just come home. I've been looking forward to hearing all about your journey. I'm afraid there's not very much to tell. I can't can't believe that. Your trip was a success, wasn't it? A distinct success. It was very nice. And you didn't mind being with all those Germans? And of course, they're not like English people. One has to get used to their ways. They sometimes do things that, well, that English people wouldn't do, you know. But I always think that one has to take things as they come. What sort of things do you mean? Miss Reed looked at her friend calmly. Her long, stupid face had a placid look, and Miss Bryce never noticed that in the eyes was a strangely mischievous twinkle. Things of no importance, really. Just funny, unexpected, rather nice things. There's no doubt that travel is a wonderful education. And that is Winter Cruise by Somerset Maugham. Oh, that man's imagination and his wonderful use of the English language. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, it's a recent discovery of mine, and I think it's pure delight. So, anywho, that is Tales and Cocktails for this particular Wednesday evening, and I hope you will join me again next Wednesday for another edition of the same, of Tales and Cocktails. Good night, all. Thank you so much for being with me. Bye now.